Hi folks, I'm Jack Kennedy. Welcome to another episode of Farm Tech Talk, the Livestock Show. Shout out to our supporters, Ornua, Grassland Agro and Alltech. Later in the show, we'll be joined from Yvonne Cooney from Ornua, and we'll also be joined to start a discussion on winter management with Cathal Bohane from Alltech. I'm joined by my regular panel of gurus, Aidan Brennan, Adam Woods and Darren Carty. Aidan, if I start with you this week, you're on the road. You're under pressure. You're on the judging job again this week, are you?
No, Jack. I'm actually doing writing articles this week for the Irish Dairy Farmer magazine, which will be out in early November. So that's this week's task. I was judging last week, so every week is different.
Good job. What's in the pages, dairy pages this week? You have some of those farm visits from last week profiled, have you?
That's right, Jack. Yeah. So last week we're judging farmers for the Grassland Farmer of the Year competition. So we've 3 of those featured now this week in the paper. We've Caroline Walsh, a dairy farmer from West Cork, John Galvin, a dairy farmer from West Cork as well, and then we've Shane Kinsella, a dairy farmer from Piltown in County Kilkenny.
Okay, good job. So that's part of the, as you say, that's not your first week. You've a couple and have you much more to do?
Yeah, Jack, I suppose that's after this week we'll have 6 farmers profiled, and there's about 6 more to go in terms of the dairy side, and then we've sheep and beef then after that. So we're getting all the sectors involved, and there's a fair regional spread as well, Jack. Across the country of farmers that's going to be profiled in it. They're the ones that were shortlisted for judging. The shortlisting is based on the amount of grass that they've grown, the number of grazings they get per year, and the amount of measurements that they do in the year. So they're the 3 kind of parameters for shortlisting, and then judges go on farm then, and they determine then, I suppose, to pick the winner in each category based on actual on-farm performance, and how the farmer performs on the day of the judging itself.
Aidan, obviously one of the issues at this time of the year, obviously cows are walking a little bit longer to the kind of shoulders of the farms, etc., trying to clean up the last bit of grass, and roadways are getting wet, etc., and that kind of thing. There's more lameness. You'd see more lameness in dairy herds at this time of the year. What's the kind of the top tips in terms of prevention at this time of the year?
Yeah, Jack, you're dead right. There's an awful lot more cows are turning lame now this time of year, and as you say, they're walking longer distances because they're going to further paddocks. Roadways are wet now after a lot of rain and a full year of walking, I suppose, on roads and mucking them up a little bit. In terms of prevention, like there's probably only a couple of things you can kind of do to prevent more lameness, and the first one is about roadway maintenance. So that's something that could be done this winter. It's not going to make any difference really now, but and it's about making sure that the surface of the road is smooth, so there's no stones jumping up, or sharp stones, sharp edges that the cows are going to damage their feet on. That's a key one. So but that takes investment. It takes annual investment really to get that right, and make sure the water gets away, because if the water's getting away, you won't have as much muck on it. That's the first thing. I suppose second thing then is the foot baiting. Now there's mixed views on this. Personally, I'm not as sure that it is important for most herds preventing injury, because that's the cause of 95% of lameness in Irish dairy farms is actually injury, not mortellaro or digital dermatitis. Like in a lot of cases, that disease is being over prescribed. It's misdiagnosed in a lot of farms that it's injuries is the main cause. Look, it definitely has benefits if you have mortellaro. If you don't have mortellaro, I'm not so sure. Some people say it hardens the feet, we're going through a blue stone or copper sulfate. There's mixed views on that, but look, if mortellaro is an issue, definitely do it. And the third one then, I suppose, is maybe if you have lame cows, to reduce the amount of walking that they have to do. So keep them in a paddock near the farm, near the yard, so there's less walking. And a common area where a lot of lameness happens is at the point where the farm roadway, so that the stoned roadway meets the concrete of the yard, or that's the collecting yard or the farmyard itself. Some farmers will put a kind of a lip there to prevent stones from being swept up. But the key thing is to make sure that there's no stones on that concrete. Because if you think of it, like if a cow walks in a stone on a roadway, at least there's a bit of give in the roadway, the stone will move a bit, but there's no give in concrete. So the full weight of the cow's foot is going to go onto that stone, and like in many cases it'll damage the hoof in that case. So they're kind of the couple of tips I'd be saying at this time of year, Jack, to do. But of course, as soon as there's a cow getting lame, she needs to be lifted, because cows have a high tolerance towards lameness, so they don't want to display lameness because that's a sign of weakness. So obviously, a cow that is lame is showing is very sore with it. So the sooner that cow can be lifted and be footage there of just cows being foot paired, it's very important to get that done ASAP.
Aidan, the other piece that's happening at this time of the year, obviously, is guys are trying to stretch the rotation on what grass they've left. So I even see some of the guys with in-calf heifers on out farms, they're giving them a bale of silage now, and there's guys buffer feeding with, I see bits of maize happening going in, or maybe again bits of round bale silage. What's the kind of the general trust of feeding silage at grass now? What do lads need to look out for?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's common at this stage, Jack. Most like a lot of farmers are now feeding some bit of silage, or at least are thinking about it. Look, it's grand. It's good to stretch. It's a good cheap way of stretching the rotation length, but it does cause problems in the sense that it's much harder to get a good clean out when there's a lot of silage going into the diet. So really, the timing of the silage is important when it's being fed. Like for me, it should be before milking, not after milking, because if you have cows going out to grass after milking that are all that are being kept back and given silage for 2 or 3 hours, they're going to lose their appetite for grazing. So ideally, if you have to feed silage, I would do it before milking, and limit the amount of silage you need. Only feed the minimum required, because it has two effects. It reduces your protein content in the milk, and it also reduces the cow's appetite. Now that's we want to reduce the cow's appetite because we want it to stretch the grass that's available, but the issue is clean outs, and now we're in the last rotation end, so you're closing paddocks now for the winter. You want them to be well cleaned and the regrowth come back to be clean and nice and green at the base, but that's not going to happen if there's a lot of rejected grass there. That's only going to increase the amount of dead material over the winter. You'll have a lot of senescence, and it won't be as nice a grass as if it was well cleaned out. So I'd say only feed the minimum that's necessary, and in some cases, Jack, like there's no need to feed silage at all. I was on a farm this week, and the farmer was feeding, I think, 4 or 5 kilos of grass, but our silage, I should say. But he hadn't the grass walked. He wasn't aware of how much grass he had and where it was relative to target. So I mean, only do it where necessary. There's no benefit to feeding silage now if you have plenty of grass, like. So that's kind of the advice I'd be saying.
Okay. Last question. There's guys beginning to think, obviously, of drying off maybe heifers or second poor condition, second calvers, etc., that kind of thing. In terms of dry cow therapy and putting in the right dry cow tube, like are guys doing much testing out there for sensitivity, or what's happening?
So I'd say it's relatively small, Jack. I've covered this week in management notes. It's a relatively small number of people doing it at the moment, but I'd say it's going to increase. There's a lot more interest in it, and I suppose it's a kind of a precursor towards selective dry cow therapy in many respects, because when you are using antibiotics, you should be using the ones that are most targeted for your farm. So the advice is that if you've high cell count cows over the next couple of weeks, to take samples from the highest quarter within those. So you're going to do a milk recording in the next couple of weeks. You get back, the 8 or 10 high cell count cows. Now if they haven't been treated in the last month or so, do a CMT test on them, so the high quarter, the quarter that's infected. Take that sample in a sterile bottle, and maybe you want to keep it for a couple of weeks in the freezer, and then you can add to the number of samples you've taken. If you get a cow with clinical mastitis over the weeks, take that sample before you treat her, put them all together, send them away for a culture and sensitivity test, and you'll get a result back, and in terms of what antibiotic dry cow tubes will work best in your herd. Ideally, I mean, you should be taking a few samples from earlier in the year as well, particularly in spring, of clinical cases, because sometimes you'll have different bacteria affecting the herd now versus what's going to affect it next spring. And I suppose the idea there, Jack, is that you're going to pick a dry cow tube that'll act on the type of bacteria you have that's causing mastitis in your herd. Because look, there's lots of different strains of mast, and I suppose the worst thing to do is to be using a tube that may not be effective with the ones that you have.
Okay, thanks for that, Aidan. Lots of information there. We'll catch up again next week. Adam, to come to you, speaking of running and shoes and wearing soles, you said that we'd get to €4 a kilo for Christmas. It's obviously a marathon, not a sprint in the beef trade.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah, look, I guess we thought maybe numbers would be maybe a little bit tighter And looking at markets, we have a story in the paper this week about UK markets. I guess where they're going. Retail sales in the UK are up 13.8% in value, up 10% in volume. That hasn't been passed back to Irish farmers. Anyway, it's been passed back maybe to UK farmers and Northern Irish farmers, but we're not seeing that lift. And you have to question, if that lift in prices is there, where is that going? Because that's our main export market going across there. So definitely there has to be questions asked about what's happening there. I still think maybe beef will come on a little bit. I think you'll see a big surge in demand coming up to Christmas. We've seen roast sales in the UK for the 12 weeks up to the 6th of September jump by 30%. So that's positive, I guess, for beef farmers, because maybe it's changing consumer habits, maybe more back to cooking at home rather than eating out. Obviously, they couldn't eat out with COVID and with lockdown and would say restaurant closures. So I think that's a positive, and I think maybe that could stand us. If there was a silver lining in this big cloud that's over us, that could be it.
Okay, good man. The Weanling trade, again, you were around a couple of marks this week. Any stir there?
Yeah, Jack, I was in Carrigallen Saturday. Again, really a rocketing trade. And really, you'd wonder, is there a bubble there around this in-calf job? Because you have a couple of guys, especially up this country in Cavan, maybe in the northwest, around the in-calf heifer job. You have a couple of specialised operations now, buying in either a Weanling heifer or a maiden heifer, putting her in calf, and then selling her as an in-calf heifer. And you have a couple of sales coming up in that, a couple of big ones in Elphin, a big one next Monday night in Carrigallen. But these guys are out at the moment, and they're buying in these breeding heifers, and they're giving absolute London in terms of money. I seen a 330 kilo little roan limousine heifer calf by EBY hitting 17.20 in Carrigallen last Saturday. And that, I would say, person that bought that animal will probably put that animal in calf, keep it to about 3-year-old, and sell it on maybe at 2.5-3 grand, maybe even 3.5 grand. Depending on the trade at the time. But we're seeing a really strong trade for those in-calf heifers, and that's probably a function of the good weaning trade that we're seeing. I know in Carrigallen on Saturday, prices are up about 20 cent a kilo. So that's on a 350 kilo Weanling. You're up 70 euros there in terms of year on year. A really good, we'll say, solid trade the whole way through. A couple of good southern-based customers. So again, that Weanling trade is showing no signs of dropping back. Even with high numbers, it's still staying really, really strong, which is really positive for beef farmers.
Of course, you're hoping to get some of that 3,000 euros a heifer. You've the Tullamore Farm in calf sale coming up.
Yeah, I don't know about 3,000, Jack. I'll not refuse it if we get it. Well, look, you're talking two different types. It's hard to explain it, I guess, to a dairyman, but you're talking two very different types of animals. Maybe you're talking 3 years old with these specialised, maybe in calf sales, or more for a functional, maybe type of a heifer. We're putting them in calf, 2-year-old, calving a 2-year-old. So our heifers are around sort of 18, 19 months at the moment, scanned in calf. And yeah, we have a big day coming up next Wednesday evening in Roscrea Mart. We've 24 in calves, 5 maidens. The majority of them genotype 4 and 5 star eligible for BDGP. And look, that's the model we went down on Tullamore Farm, Jack. And this is a big day, I guess, in the year in terms of a sale day. Because I suppose we put all our eggs in one basket as regards going down that road, going down that system. But we're happy. We're happy last year. We averaged over 1,300 for our heifers last year, our in-calf heifers. And again, it'll be a similar situation, hopefully this year. And we're even hoping for a bit more, because I'd say our heifers this year are even better again. We have a couple of great red and white Seminole heifers in-calf to EBY again, calving in February and March. So again, look, we're hoping for good customers there. And again, the Weanling trade will hopefully, maybe help us a little bit next Wednesday night.
I see you're jumping over to short turns as well. Tell me about the short turns.
Yeah, this is a positive story, Jack, I guess. I visited a farm a couple of weeks ago up in Antrim, the Glenarm estate, and they developed a beef brand in 2008 in partnership with Peter Hannon of Hannon Meats and Moira. And it's Shorthorn, it's Glenarm Shorthorn beef, and they're coming down south with it. They've been going for a couple of years now in the north with this scheme. Look, it's low numbers, Jack. It's maybe 30 animals a week in the north, but they will say demand is outstripping supply. They're supplying a couple of high-end restaurants across Europe. They're supplying a really high retail, unit in London. And they're offering a really good price there to start off. So they're coming in with a 10% bonus on top of your base plus QA. So if you had a heifer, a Shorthorn heifer this week, and she kills out between 280 and 380, she's at 365 base plus 20 of a QA bonus, that's 385. They'll add on 38 cent of a bonus on top of that, which is 10% of the price. And you'll end up around 420 or 423 a kilo for your animal. And what's unusual, Jack, is in terms of the spec, it's between 280 and 380. It's a no plus or a nor. They don't want ewe cattle, and they want them really, really fat. And I visited Peter Hannon. I'm writing about it in next week's paper in the Butchers and Moira. And like you're talking maybe, an inch of fat there on the top of that steak. And in terms of buying it, in terms of going in and thinking, geez, I wouldn't like to buy it, but they maintain that adds flavour to it, and they're looking for fat cattle for that scheme. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Again, we have a couple of interviews in next week's paper, and people can make up their own minds on that.
Adam, you have a piece on feeding Weanlings, meal feeding Weanlings, I suppose. Like, what kind of typically are lads feeding, we'll say, in terms of quantities to Weanlings as they kind of go through the weaning process?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, Jack, maybe they're not feeding enough because silage quality isn't where it should be on beef farms. And look, that's critical in terms of where we are on beef farms, and that's what I said was the first step in terms of testing your quality or silage. That needs to be first, because without that, you don't know where you're going. And look, at the ranges, we'll say for your maybe bull calf going in there, if you're on really poor silage, maybe 60, 65 DMD, you're going to have to go in there with say 3 kilos of meal a day on that, we'll say, silage. Whereas if you're up at 75 DMD silage, you're probably able to cut that back to a kilo. A couple of things with weanlings, like really on beef farms, weanlings, I've seen weanlings go into sheds, we'll say, they're coming out later next spring than they go in. And that's down to a couple of reasons, maybe a feed barrier too high, and maybe intakes, an animal not getting its potential as regards intakes, maybe dosing not right, maybe ventilation not right. We tend to push weanlings into pens, maybe 8, 9 weanlings to a pen where we should only have 7. You're talking 2 square meters, 2.2 square meters for those weanlings. But probably the feed is the most important. And you're aiming for the best quality silage on the farm to go into those weanlings, and then based on the quality of your silage, adjusting your meal feeding then with that.
Okay, Adam, was there anything last question, was there anything jumped out for you for suckler farmers in the budget, did you think?
Yeah, I guess it's great to see a rollover of BDGP, Jack. There was a lot of concern there around what's going to happen at the end of the year. And I know Darren wrote a lot about that this week in the paper. And also that COVID, I suppose, beef scheme, look, for want of a better word, is BFS. So it's great to see those 2 schemes being rolled over for another year, because, look, without those supports, Jack, we're in a really difficult place. And it's good to see the government really recognising that those schemes are hopefully here to stay.
Good man. Listen, we'll leave it at that. I think I heard the lawnmower starting there. You're going to get the last cut, obviously, of the lawn this autumn. Darren, to come to you in terms of the budget, I touched off it there with Adam. Like, I mean, was there much in it? Do you feel for kind of suckler and sheep farmers, or kind of was it like there seems to be a lot of positivity in general about the budget? Like, so I mean, maybe just give us a flavour for some of the kind of take home points that you picked up.
Yeah, Jack, I suppose the way that I described the budget, it was really a budget of maintaining what we had and ensuring that we were going to, say, roll over all the schemes that were there. So as Adam mentioned, the BDGP scheme is going to roll over, whether or not they'd maybe cut down in suckler numbers or where they go, or where was the future going to be on that. So at least this gives some stability that there will be something there. The details are yet to come on it. As Adam said, the COVID beef scheme is essentially the BPS. There's also 5 million there on an weighing scheme, and this was something that was announced in the 2020 budget but never actually materialised. It was announced as a tenner ahead to be able to weigh maybe male dairy calves, or also say beef bred dairy cross calves to come onto beef farms. So it'll be interesting to see that getting up and running. On the sheep side of things, look, I suppose the direct one is the rollover of the sheep welfare scheme. 17 million put out for that. That'll cover, say, the existing cohort of farmers, plus it'll allow a bit for new entrants, which are small on a yearly basis. And if you were to bunch, say, maybe sheep and beef farmers in together, Jack, and look at the overall agri-environmental schemes, this is probably where there is a lot there for farmers. And maybe the way Minister Charlie McConalogue described it was building the foundations for major schemes for the future. And if we look specifically at that, the 79 million put forward for new, say, agri-environmental schemes. The big one that we've talked about here a few times is on the rep side of things. Amy Ford met Minister McConalogue on Wednesday morning, talked through that a bit more. And what he's seeing, or maybe what he's targeting, is that to try and get sort of that up and running in early 2021. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of maybe infrastructure to get in place to roll out that scheme, to actually, I suppose, maybe decide what exactly is going to be in it, because we're looking towards, I suppose, a future of whether it be Green Deal, whether it be CAP, whether it be reps on trying to, I suppose, maybe justify or trying to reduce the, I suppose, volume of carbon, or that agri-environmental schemes will capture more carbon, and that they'll also increase the volume of biodiversity on farms. So that's going to be a big one going forward. Also good on there on the agri-environmental schemes, glass rolling over. And if you take glass and ANC together, you're looking at about 450 million of a rollover scheme there for the two of them. It's surprising, Jack, and look, we're still seeing little elements or say different parts of schemes coming through. Say they're the headline ones. I suppose you could say a headline one is the 4 million extra for the organic scheme. The forestry scheme is going to be rolled over with 100 million. That has been undersubscribed in recent years, so there was no need to put more money. But I suppose the little things extra that we're seeing is there's 10 million for a national soil sampling plan. We're unsure as yet as to what that will mean or how it will be rolled out. There's 100,000 for wool sustainability or wool market study. There's 250,000 for land use study to see, I suppose, maybe build into biodiversity or to see how we're using land going forward. So these little, I suppose, maybe small parts of that 79 million scheme will materialise over the next week or couple of weeks as we run into Christmas, and the department, I suppose, maybe start to see more on where they go. And for dairy farmers, I suppose, look at Jack, the TAMS was the big one, and still some question marks. There was a lot of worry, Jeannie, on Tuesday afternoon. There was no mention of TAMS in the initial briefing notes. It came to light later on that evening that there was 80 million, say, going to be for TAMS in 2021. Essentially, what that means is that there's enough money to roll over a similar type scheme or a similar type allocation of what was there for 2020. When I say the questions that are there, Jack, the minister did allude to that could be used to service some existing commitments. We know that the TAM scheme has been oversubscribed for the last few tranches. It was no different for the tranche to close on the 31st of October, and again for the last tranche 20. So it'll be, I suppose, maybe interesting to see this, what money is left over there from projects that were maybe approved at the start of the scheme. And if we look at them, or if we say maybe why are they important, is that at the initial outset of TAMS, the general approval period was 2.5 to 3 years. That's since changed to 6 months for purchasing equipment or 12 months for maybe carrying out buildings work. So a lot of them are due to fall through in the next, I suppose, maybe month or two. So it'll be interesting to see what money is, say, allocated. Will that be I suppose, maybe patriated back into the scheme to allow a lot of them oversubscribed applications to be passed? And if that is the case, well, then there'll be a full 80 million to go to 2021. And from a dairy farmer point of view, the big question I'm getting, Jack, in recent days, and look, we don't have the answer yet, we hope to have it in the next week or so, is that will dairy farmers that have, say, I suppose, exhausted their allocation, will they start off in a clean slate in 2021, and will they be allowed to put in an application again?
Okay, fair play. No, so I mean, you've given us a good feel for what was in it in terms of the highlights. There's lots more in the paper. Obviously, you've a good bit written on it, and you did a good webinar again last night with IFAC and the Agricultural Science Association. So, in fairness, if anyone wanted a bit more detail on that, you can press play on that webinar that you did last night, just as the budget was being announced. Darren, to come back to business in terms of the lamb trade and what happened this week, up or down?
Probably, Jack, strengthening, but it's not reflected in the courts. And what we're seeing is, I suppose, a bit of a cat and mouse game at the moment, in that factories are really trying to, I suppose, keep a lid on price, which you'd expect them to try and do, but numbers are slightly tightening. And now, when I say numbers are tightening, the kill is still over 60,000, and it shows the appetite that's there at the moment, and that factories are moving big numbers of sheep. What there, I suppose, maybe if you're to look at, say, the difference or the variability between quotes and what's being paid, quotes are between 490 and 510. There has been a bit of movement in recent days. They're rising by 5 cents to 10 cents. So we're now seeing quotes maybe starting off at €5 a kilo. You're seeing no real lamb sold under 510 a kilo. So farmers that are maybe selling small numbers on an individual basis, they're trading somewhere between 510 and 525 a kilo. And we're seeing, I suppose, the deals I talked about anywhere from 525 to 535, and I've heard a couple of 540s in recent days. Adam mentioned, Jack, I suppose, of what's driving this and say where we are comparing to this time last year. And I did a bit of, say, looking at that this week as well. And what has really come to light, I suppose, is that COVID has brought so many negatives. But Adam mentioned that it's also changed eating habits. And the sheep sector, I suppose, was lucky. We're always bemoaned the fact that we don't have a high food service sales pattern. But this, say, I suppose, when you've seen the food service close down, we haven't been hit as hard. The fact that more people are eating at home, and particularly more German consumers, Belgian consumers, French consumers, and Scandinavian consumers, that has been a big benefit to say demand and export markets. There's also less New Zealand sheep meat in the EU market at the minute. That is likely to continue because they are apportioning more their lamb towards China, towards the US, and also the lamb, say, supplies for the coming months are probably going to be back from New Zealand, just going on drought and some snowstorms that they're having. They're being really hampered, I suppose, over the last year by weather, and that's expected to reduce their lamb crop by about 100,000 to 150,000. The last aspect, I suppose, Jack, it's worth mentioning is where is prices at the moment. Prices are about 70 to 80 cents ahead of this time last year, so you're looking at 13 to 16 euros on a lamb. And look at that is needed. Prices above €5 a kilo is where you really need the sheep sector to be at to allow farmers to reinvest and I suppose maybe look forward with a bit of confidence to breeding, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Okay, good man, Darren. That's a good kind of an overview in terms of what's happening in the market. Darren, you have a nice piece there. Just saw an interesting piece there this week on kind of, is it lung cancer in sheep? Just give us a kind of a feel for what's happening there.
Yeah, Jack. So we had our third Northern Ireland Sheep Programme webinar last year, and this is something that the programme has really honed in on. And I suppose it's relatively unknown, Jack, that it's been around for generations, but the reason why it's unknown is that usually it's not distinguished because you either have yours going up, say on hill farms in particular, not coming down and maybe not realizing that this is the cause of the disease. So essentially it's a disease called OPA, or a lot of farmers will call it Yagziki. It's caused by Yagziki sheep retrovirus, and essentially what it is, it's a tumor that affects the lungs of sheep. And I suppose what farmers or what the industry is trying to do now is trying to determine some way of identifying it while they still have good value in sheep, and also to nip it in the bud that it's not spreading to flocks. So the only way, and this is why it's so, I suppose, maybe hard to diagnose it, is that there's no accurate blood test for it. The only way of diagnosing a live sheep is through ultrasound or thoracic scanning. So it's essentially your scanner that you have for scanning yours. There's a scan taken on both sides of the lungs, and you're putting a score on whether you see any lesions or any tumours in the lungs at that stage. And the vet we had talking last week, Patrick Grant, is one of the, I suppose, maybe pioneering vets in Ireland. He's based in Northern Ireland, but he's been doing this for 3, 4, 5 years. There is more vets in the north now doing it. It's, I suppose, maybe the process itself is pioneered by research in Moordoon Agricultural College. And the reason why, I suppose, maybe the Scots are maybe one step ahead is that it tends to be seen more in hill sheep farms. Now, whether that's to do with, Jack, a higher prevalence, or that the fact that hill sheep farmers hill sheep are probably facing more stress and they exhibit this more often is probably a combination of factors there. There is cases of it in lowland sheep farms, and I suppose, look, at what we're trying to do through the programme, through also working with CAFRE, is to try and develop some sort of a programme that farmers could follow. CAFRE have been doing testing for a few years. They've got the prevalence in their hill flock down from about 8% of sheep that have shown, say, or that have been identified with some health problems, down to 0.8% in their latest scan. So it shows that there can be, I suppose, maybe benefits, or there can be progress. It's not cheap, Jack, to carry out. It's roughly somewhere between £150 to £2, or say £170 to £220 to carry it out or to do scanning. But I suppose the point made by Peter and Carol McCaughan, which were the two farmers that we, I suppose, maybe honed in on in last week's webinar, is that by selling the ewes that they've identified at an early stage and before they start losing condition, they have more than covered their costs. And the knock-on effect to that is that they've more lambs to sell, and that they're seeing that they have a switch or a swing in their business of plus £3,000 to £5,000, which isn't to be sniffed at.
Okay, Darren, thanks for that. I mean, obviously, you've given us a good feel for the budget in terms of what happened there, the lamb trade, and we touched off that piece on cancer in sheep, which is very interesting. And if guys are interested in watching a bit more on that, they can obviously watch the Northern Ireland Sheep Programme webinar that she published there last week. So that's more information if someone was interested. Earlier I spoke with Cathal Bohane from Alltech, and effectively we started talking about this whole piece that's going to happen over the next couple of weeks in terms of winter management and what are the key points to kind of look out for. So this covers across the dairy, beef and sheep sectors. There's interesting points for farmers in all sectors. So listen, have a listen to what myself and Cathal had the chat about in terms of winter management. I suppose, Cathal, I mean, one of the big questions that farmers will ask, like, is, I mean, why the focus on the dry cow period? Like, we'll say, or what's so good about it in terms of, what's the importance of it, I suppose?
I suppose a lot of people see the dry cow is unproductive. Obviously, milk has stopped. But like probably from a nutrition point of view, it's probably the most important part of that full 365-day cycle. I suppose, we want the cow to calve down as fit and not fat as possible, I suppose, really, and to kind of hit the ground running, so to speak. And I suppose, look, in a lot of spring calving systems now, the fact that block has got kind of tighter due to fertility improvements over the last number of years, you don't have an opportunity that if something goes wrong within that period to actually maybe correct it. So it's very, very important. Preparation is probably key here to get a good dry cow program.
I mean, Cathal, if I was to ask you to break down that dry cow period, whether it's 8, 10, 12, 14 weeks, I mean, what are the kind of key pillars that you'd break it down into?
Yeah, so we've been working for a long number of years, both with Keenan and Alltech, working practically with farms over the last maybe 30, 40 years, looking at maybe the key areas. And again, obviously, farmers are very, very busy as well. So we try to keep it as probably simple as possible. And we focus very much on what we call focus for 150, that 60-day dry period, first of all, and then that day after calving, getting that cow back in calf. 4 key areas out of that: body condition score, nutrition, minerals, and management are the 4 key areas that we look at.
I mean, if I was to ask you, I mean, is there one more important than the other, or do you see them all kind of playing a kind of an equal part in that whole kind of period, Cathal?
I think they all play kind of an important part. I suppose body condition score this time of the year is very, very important. If we have a cow that's calving down, maybe too fat at calving, first of all, their intake is going to be a lot lower. Post calving. Second of all, she's more than likely going to have a metabolic issue, so there's going to be veterinary intervention there. Plus, as well, she's still a fat cow, and she's going to have to process a lot of that feed, that fat through her liver, which is going to have a negative impact on her nutrition. Look, it's all about kind of analysing the silage here, getting the right diet in place. Contrary to what you might probably hear, a lot of dry cows are supposed to eat 11 kilos of dry matter, but realistically they'll eat 13, 14 kilos of dry matter. So they're going to put on a phenomenal amount of condition during the dry period on good quality silage. Minerals, I think, we tend to focus very much on the quantity of the minerals. I think it's very important to look at the quality of those minerals, and management is a key one as well. Sometimes maybe overlooked, but sometimes very, very key. So we want the whole thing to be stress-free, not just maybe for the farmer during the springtime, which can be very stressful, but also for the cow. We need to remove any of the bottlenecks within the system that restrict the cow from moving freely through that system.
Cathal, you're touching off, I suppose, one of my key questions, and that is kind of, here we are now, the 16th of October. It's we're still 4 to 6 weeks away from the end from the start of the dry period, from the end of milking. But you were saying that now is the time to kind of focus on that transition period, that dry cow feed period, rather than leave it until 6 weeks' time.
Yeah, look, it's essential. Again, cows are more in tune to putting on body condition score this time of the year. And obviously, if you feed them as well too, if they require extra feeding, you're going to get that extra level of production probably as well. And they're more in tune with putting on that body condition score. So it's very important to actually focus on that area from kind of now on. And really, really condition score your cows, not just kind of maybe look at them in the parlour or look at feed passage, etc. you have to really stand above them and touch them and feel them, so to speak, really, in order to genuinely condition score them.
Yeah, so I had a good chat with Cathal on winter management, and we'll hear more from the Alltech team in the coming weeks. My final guest today is Yvonne Cooney from Ornua, and I had a chat with Yvonne about one of the issues that we don't hear much about, and again it straddles all sectors, is food waste and what it means for, I suppose, the sustainability of all the livestock sector, including the meat and dairy protein sectors. Here's a brief synopsis of the chat I had with Yvonne. We hear a lot, I suppose, in the ag world specifically around kind of climate bills and methane emissions and carbon dioxide, etc. Yvonne, but one of the interesting aspects that you touched off there, you just mentioned, was food waste. I mean, that obviously comes under your umbrella. Can you maybe just tell us what your understanding is of food waste and kind of maybe a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a food business, food waste is right up there as one of our priorities. Back in 2017, we actually engaged with a customer of ours, with Tesco, on an initiative called Champions 12.3. And ultimately, what that initiative is it's 20 of Tesco's top suppliers banding together and committing to reducing their food waste levels or halving them by 2030. And just this year, that program has actually been built on, and it's now the 10 by 20 by 30 initiative. And again, we're playing a key role in that. So really the aim here is to target our food waste, to measure our levels of food waste, and to act to reduce them very, very significantly. So each year, Ornua looks at around a 10% year-on-year reduction of our food waste levels. This year, we actually managed to reduce by 20% versus last year. And that's really down to a whole load of different initiatives. Primarily, Jack, it's really, we look to redistribute food where we possibly can. So you mentioned our business here in Ireland, Kerrygo Park, for example. Any end product that perhaps isn't compatible for sale or for retail, that's redistributed through our food charity partners, Food Cloud. And Food Cloud, they then redistribute it to those in need. So a good example actually this week we're working on is, as a result of COVID, the aviation industry has certainly reduced in capacity. So we're looking at the butter parcels we have. So those little butter squares that you'll see on any flight you might take abroad. So now we have a big stock of those, and certainly they won't be going to the aviation industry in full. So we're working now with Food Cloud to see, can we redistribute those maybe through food parcels for the community in the run up to Christmas? So really coming up with innovative solutions. We also certainly look across our supply chain where food waste happens before it reaches an end product. Is there something we can do with that? And most of the time we direct that to animal feed. In our US ingredients business, for example, a lot of the food waste there actually goes towards fish bait. So it's finding innovative sources for that waste. And this year, our food waste was 0.05% of our total food handled, which is just 16 tons. So it's a very, very minuscule amount, but there's always room for improvement, and it's a big focus for us going forward, and certainly along with our customers as well.
Yeah, so I mean, as you say, the waste potentially starts right from when the milk is collected from the farm, all the way through the processing, and then through the whole retail space. And again, of course, in our own fridges and at home, in our own homes, in terms of the waste that happens. But I mean, there's very little you can do, I'll say, Yvonne, to reduce the amount of waste in my fridge. Is that fair to say, or kind of how do you work that?
Yeah, I think I think there's definitely consumer education piece there. So, we can do everything we can along our own supply chain right up until that end point. But really it is in the hands of the consumer to ensure that, that they're reducing their food waste wherever they possibly can. And I suppose there's a number of areas that can help in assisting consumers in doing that. And that's really thinking about the products that we create and making sure that they're not conducive to food waste, or, that the packaging that we might wrap those products in, that ensures that the food doesn't spoil unnecessarily, or it's not fit for consumption. So certainly that's something we're always looking at. But ultimately, it's up to the consumer. And I would say we've definitely seen through we receive a lot of consumer queries through our different teams and different markets, and they're becoming more and more conscious of their sustainability habits, and certainly more and more conscious of the levels of food waste that they incur within their own home. So they're actively actually reaching out to us to say, is there something we can do when the butter is coming to an end date, or so that's really positive. We're seeing that more and more.
I mean, I would have heard figures, Yvonne, that listen, there's something like, I don't know, 35% of food wasted. I mean, the number you quoted there is minuscule in comparison. I mean, can you maybe just kind of put it in perspective in terms of kind of across the world, what's the kind of, my number of 30%, how far or close is that to what it really is in terms of food waste globally?
Yeah, I would say that number is pretty accurate, Jack. I think some industries more so than others are, I suppose, more actively monitoring their levels of food waste and really putting plans in place to reduce that. Certainly other industries that, it might be more difficult, such as industries who are creating, real fresh products, for example. And you can't really redistribute fresh products because, once they're wasted, they're spoiled pretty rapidly. So it definitely varies very, very wildly across the world. However, I would say that the figure is definitely coming down, and certainly through some of the work that we do with Tesco and talking to some of their other suppliers. Suppliers are really coming up with ways that they can utilize perhaps a fresh product, for example, for incorporation into, the biogas industry. We see that quite heavily across Europe, not as much here in Ireland just yet, but certainly food companies are looking at, if we can't redistribute this product, if we can't cut it out by some measure through our own operations, is there a way that we can put this back into a more circular economy or contribute in another way? So I would say definitely a lot more to be done across the board in terms of the food industry. But certainly just speaking for our own dairy industry, the performance has been quite good. And I would say that is the same case, as is the same case for all of the co-ops and the Ornua member suppliers as well.
Right, folks, we've come to the end of another very busy show. Thanks to our speakers today, and also thanks again to our supporters, Ornua, Alltech and Grassland Agro. We'll be back again next week. Stay safe and stay farming.